your program might say Max Finlayson doing an introduction. Well, I'm not Max Finlayson, so don't ask me any tricky questions about the Murray-Darling Basin Plan or anything like that, okay? But I'm Adrian Lindner, the head of the Wagga Wagga campus of Sturt University. So welcome along this afternoon, and also I would like to give you a welcome to country, to Wiradjuri country. So we pay our respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the tradition, the memories and the customs of Aboriginal people. I'll just give you a bit of a scenario. It's a rural scenario. You've got land degradation, weed infestation, crop disease and rust in the wheat. Sounds like maybe this year, last year, pretty recent times. In fact, it was in 1890 that was happening. The colony of New South Wales was still fairly young by that stage, and that was the scenario. Anyway, the government had vision, and they said they need to do something about it. And they set up what they called experimental farms. And one of them they set up in 1892 was just over the hill here, the Wagga Wagga Experimental Farm. And in those days, that was very strategic and applied research. They had to educate, they had to develop new ways of cropping, new ways of land management. And William Farrer, you might remember him from your $2 note, he was a researcher who did quite a bit of work over the hill at the Wagga Wagga Experimental Farm. And so that really set the scene from 1892 for this campus, this location here. We went on to become the Wagga Agricultural College, and then later on the College of Advanced Education, and only 22 years ago a university with other campuses at other cities. So although I've only been a university for 22 years, Sturt University has in fact roots, deep roots in strategic and applied research, and that's what we continue, and that's what we are proud of as a university. You won't see us doing pure research or blue sky research. We're not looking for life on Mars or anything like that. We're very conscious of making our research practical and pragmatic, that will make a difference to our regions, to our communities, to the nation. And that impact is becoming more and more recognised. We've recently completed, actually on the other side of the hill again, the site of our Wagga Experimental Farm, a national life science hub. And that's a $40 million facility, which is teaching and research space, laboratory, teaching rooms, and it's mainly about plant science, animal science, biosecurity, and food security, and biomedical science, and also looking at the interaction between animal science and human health. For instance, Hendra virus, it's an issue for the equine industry, but it's got ramifications for the human health as well. So our regional research has significant flow-on effects to our nation, but also internationally. We have a number of partner research collaboration MOUs with international universities. Particularly China is very much interested in what we're doing in relation to agricultural science. And so I guess the little region of Riverina, of Wagga, is making a difference. And on that note, I introduce you then to our topic for this afternoon, which is reimagining the future of regional Australia. And it's hosted by the Regional Australia Institute, and we thank them for organising this workshop this afternoon. We have a number of researchers in our audience, community people. And so I trust this afternoon's workshop might be an opportunity just to, I guess, refocus, celebrate what we've achieved, but maybe it's time for a new watershed of direction, a new focus for the future, and particularly what regional Australia and our research can do for our nation. I'd like to now welcome our first speaker for this afternoon. I don't think Professor Sandra Harding needs any introduction. She's a long history in the higher education sector. She's currently chair of the Regional Australia Institute for the Research Advisory Committee and also on the RAI board. So I'd like to welcome Professor Sandra Harding. If you could join me, please, in welcoming her.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Really appreciate that. And can I say thank you to each and every one of you for coming along today. It's our great privilege to be here. You may or may not be aware that this is our first birthday, the Regional Australian Institute's first birthday. So we had an AGM this morning and we had a community consultation forum as well this morning downtown. And here we are at Charles Sturt University and really delighted to be here. And when we thought about where we wanted to celebrate our first birthday, you know, where else but Wagga, as far as we're concerned. So here we are, and we're very grateful to you all for coming along. Now, my very pleasant duty is to fill you in a little bit about Regional Australia Institute, but more particularly to let you know a bit about our research activity, our approach and the key themes that we're pursuing in terms of that research. And one of the things that we really do welcome is your input into this. And as you'll hear as I speak very briefly, there are opportunities indeed for you to engage, and we're very hopeful that you'll take advantage of those opportunities. Now, Jack, I can't see what I'm seeing here. Is that a problem? I'll just have to turn around and make sure that it's on the right screen. All right, so I just mucked it up then. So let me go back. Previous. Oh, no, I should go beyond that. So, let me go to this first slide. It's very important that you do understand a little bit about what the Institute's all about. We know that there are many voices in this space, but the Institute was established, as I say, over a year ago, and the initiative behind the Institute was the agreement between the Gillard government and the independents for there to be a regional policy development centre. And as this idea further developed, the notion was that what we needed in Australia was a truly independent institute. We've got a lot of research institutes and a lot of work going on, and we think that's of great benefit and great value. But the notion is to try and draw together something which is truly independent, and therefore it's been set up as a separate organisation, separate from any university or any other body, not beholden to the government, I might say, as well, with a board that features a number of really interesting people. I'm very fortunate to join them on that board. But the Institute itself, the vision, as you can see there, what we see is about enabling all regions to achieve their potential to the benefit of all Australians. The various words that you can see there, I'll just allow you to read, describe the sort of characteristics that we like to imagine that the Institute will affirm and display over time. Our idea very much is for this to be an independent think tank, a policy place as well. We want that to happen. We certainly want to be identifying solutions to enhance prosperity and sustainability of regional Australia, and we want to foster, I think, very positive discussions about and positive understandings about what regional Australia is and what it has to offer. We imagine that a number of our research areas will be more short-term, although there will be long-term elements in them too, and you'll see some of that fairly shortly. But that's really who we are and what we're about. So perhaps I should share with you then our approach to research, just being sure that that's there. You can imagine if you're going to have an institute of this nature and one that's meant to inform policy, that's also not aimed at trying to replicate the sort of work that's going on, good work that's going on around the place, whether that's in the research communities or in the policy communities. The fact of the matter is, you know, research and understanding, better knowledge is very central, is very much central to our work. Our mission is indeed to inform policy and regional change. We aim to do that by being that authoritative and trusted source, of independent information and policy advice. And we do see that our role is not so much, I guess, to undertake the sort of research that might feature in other places, which will be long-term, looking at big issues. And I'm not saying we're going to be looking only at the little ones, but we're going to privilege research activity that can lend itself to translation and to informing policy practice, because we know there's a real need from that, from the consultations that we've done. Our approach to research from day one really has been, our attempt has been to be very consultative, and certainly towards the end of last year and early this year, we held a number of forums around the place with stakeholders from states, from the research community, from national policy people, from folk from Canberra and elsewhere, in order to help us determine what our research agenda might be. And I must say that we found that most illuminating. And again, you're not going to be surprised if you work in this space. The part of the challenge that was revealed to us was not that there is a dearth of information about regional policy and development, but rather it's very difficult for people to put their hands on it. It's very difficult to be confident about understanding what's out there and then being able to put that to work. And as you'll hear in a little while, one of our first projects, and it's one that Jack Archer will tell you a little bit about, and it's at the bottom of the slide there, is that we've completed a stocktake of regional research. And I think it's come out in a very interesting way, and I'm very pleased to tell you that each and every one of you can have access to the benefit of that research. So our approach to research, as you can see there, is not to replicate. We're not sort of reinventing the wheel, as they say. We are aimed at being authoritative and independent. We are aimed at making a difference in terms of translation and ensuring the products of the research that's undertaken not only builds on what goes before us, but also is easily transmittable to the policy space. Now, as a result of the work that we did, particularly the consultation, and interestingly, as elaborated, I suppose, and informed by the stocktake for research, what we came to is basically 4 themes of areas that we'll be looking at as an institute. What I intend to do now is to take you a slide each through each of those themes, so you get a bit of a sense of that. So the first theme, as you can see there, is about position and potential. And here what we're trying to do is to, as you can read there, develop a clearer understanding of the potential for new growth and prosperity in each region. The key objectives of this theme are, and I'll just read them out to you, they include improving the integration and availability of regional data and information, building a better understanding of the socio-economic situation in different regions and the drivers of change, building a better understanding of the sources of potential for future growth and prosperity in different regional areas, and building an understanding of how we sustain and renew regional communities. This idea of potential, we think, is very important. It's quite fraught too. We had our research advisory committee met yesterday, and there's a great deal of sort of tension in this idea of potential. We're not imagining that things stay the same and that you can, confidently predict the future of any particular region, but really what we're trying to do is to get at some of the preconditions, some of the drivers and the effects that might occur that might help us understand how we give regions a better chance of success rather than a poorer chance of success. So for us, this position and potential is really very important. We've got 2 current projects, and you can see them up there at the moment. The first one we're pretty excited about, the one about understanding regional competitiveness. And what we're looking to do there is to develop a regional competitiveness index. And there's a deal of work that's gone on behind this now, and we're now looking, and we just talked about the project outline and those who are going to assist us to develop this index. And it's going to be one that brings to bear a range of indicators. In fact, I think there's 60-odd indicators that we're looking at this stage. And then the idea is that we'll be able to put those to work, and ultimately you all will have access to data, a data set where you can manipulate those indicators. So I think what we're trying to avoid is an idea of, the number 52 being the right answer, but rather to come to a comprehensive understanding about different regions and where they're located on a range of indicators, but coming to an index all the same. We think that's probably pretty important too. So that's one project which is underway. The next one, which you'll hear a little bit about today, Professor Graeme Hugo is one of our fellows and on the Research Advisory Committee, and he's doing some work on population mobility in Australia's regions. And again, today we had a very good discussion of that in the session earlier today, and also yesterday in the work that we've been doing. So that's theme 1, position and potential. Theme 2 is realising opportunity. Now, this is really aimed at trying to arrest the negativity in the discussion that proceeds around regional Australia, and instead focus and generate a much more positive discussion about the opportunities in regional Australia. We're all accustomed to the notions about how difficult it would be, and those of us who live in regional Australia, myself included, understand all that. But what we're trying to do is to really focus on opportunities and think about how we can shift that discussion. And we've talked about that not only through research activities, but perhaps through some other opportunities where we bring people in to talk about opportunities and provide some case studies, and we have those available for you via YouTube maybe, or TED, that sort of thing. As you can see there, what this is about, that new and positive discussion, is about helping us drive understanding about how opportunities for growth and development can translate into tangible benefits for regions. And this is something that we're really wanting to grapple with over the next 12 months. We know that the benefits in terms of realising opportunities, they can flow from many things. We talked today at the early session about water being a benefit here, but also being a challenge as well. When you're in flood, it's a problem. But we talked a lot about human capital too, as well as geography, resources and economic outlooks for particular industries. So theme 2 is realising opportunity. Theme 3 we think is pretty important too. It is one of our 4. And it's about successful transitions. We know that regional areas are sometimes very vulnerable to all sorts of exogenous shocks, whether they're global forces linked to markets, or indeed whether there are climatic challenges that are foisted upon us from time to time. And we know that in many regional areas that feature smaller populations and less diverse industries, those populations in particular can be quite vulnerable. We know that there have been examples of successful transitions globally. We need to be able to learn from those, and part of what we looked at yesterday was there are a range of OECD examples, and of course that includes Canada. Canada's sort of quite a nice correlate for us. I mean, no one's going to replicate our experience, but we're really interested to see how successful transitions have proceeded. And we know that in our country too, we've had some disasters in recent years where communities have been supported to ensure that they can get out of difficult situations, whether that was the fires in Victoria, the floods in a large part really of Queensland and elsewhere in New South Wales, and also Cyclone Yasi up my way. So we know that there have been disasters, of course, and we know there has been committed efforts to try and figure out how communities might overcome those disasters. And what we're really keen to do is to see if we can nail some of that and see how we can understand recovery and how we might be able to aid recovery as a result of those sorts of shifts. But we're not just focusing on natural disasters, even though that's the current project. We all understand that this is a much bigger area of interest. Successful transitions. Theme 4 is about better services and engagement. And here we are looking at ways in which government interacts with regions in particular. We know that there are great challenges, and there are often great shifts in public policy around how services will be delivered, you know, whether it's the local, the hospital boards or Medicare locals, or there are a whole range of policy devices that are applied to regional communities. And the idea is all good and saintly, but I guess the challenge for us all is whether or not we can come to a view about how we might improve service delivery, better services and engagement for regional Australians. And the good news is the governments want this. You know, I think part of the challenge, I think oftentimes for governments, is they're not quite clear about how do we operate in this space, who do we talk to, and how do we go about better understanding what particular regions need, and then how do we engage with them in order to deliver that. So I think this is one that is going to be pretty important for us all too. We are looking to examine the current proposal for reform in local infrastructure. As you can see there, that's the current project. And indeed, the outcomes of that project are going to be released soon. And there are some real highlights linked to some relatively inexpensive reforms that might make a real difference in communities. It's a very practical project, and one that I hope will point a way forward. So those are the 4 themes that the Institute is focusing on for the moment, and they're going to give us, I think, a lot of content to dig into, and we certainly have some projects underway as a result of those. But today I also wanted to share with you something quite new, and I'm hoping that this is something that you too will be interested in engaging with. We're letting you all know today that we have up on our website an opportunity to pitch an idea. We're really hoping that Australians will have a look at this, whether you're a researcher or whether you're just an interested layperson or a policy person, anyone really, anyone with an interest in regional Australia. If you're interested, to go onto the website to pitch an idea, to let us know what you think is a good idea or a good solution or an area that needs to be examined. We're very keen to open this up to broader communities, because today we could come to Wagga and we could go down to the City Council and speak with people, and a number of ideas emerged out of the forum this morning. Clearly there's going to be, and we'll continue to do that, but there's a limit to the extent to which we can get the coverage that we'd like across this vast land of ours. So here's an opportunity for anybody, no matter where you are, to engage and help guide and shape the Institute's research activity. I really hope that this is going to be a source of great innovative ideas, and I think partnerships as well as a result of that. So, ladies and gentlemen, really that was what I had to tell you about today. I wanted to let you know that we are Regional Australia Institute. It is our birthday. I shan't require you to sing happy birthday, but you might if you like. I was particularly wanting to let you know about our research activity to date, and shortly you're going to receive some insights into the content of some of that. And I also wanted to bring to your attention, pitch an idea and encourage you to be involved in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Harding, and that was a snapshot of the research agenda for RAI, so I trust you found some insights there, and we'll leave the website up there for a little while longer, just for any notation. For 1 year old, they've been quite active, and so our next speaker is RAI Fellow, Professor Graeme Hugo, and he's going to talk about population mobility. And this is some early findings of our RAI project that has been underway. So could you please join me in welcoming Professor Graeme Hugo. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Adrian. It's a real thrill to come to Charles Sturt for the first time. It's something I've wanted to do for quite a while. It's also a real honour to be associated with the RAI. I think it's a magnificent opportunity for undertaking research which really matters. I think we've heard in the forum today how fundamental people are to the future of regional Australia. People are important. People are the most significant and important resource which we have in regional Australia. And the focus of the project which I've been asked to do is to try and come to a greater understanding of the dynamics of change of the population of regional Australia. I'm going to report on progress because it is very much a work which is undergoing. In fact, today is a big day in the life of the project, in that the Bureau of Statistics today releases the data on internal migration, which obviously is a very significant part of our study. So what I'll be reporting on is very much a work in progress. I did prepare a PowerPoint, and as pointed out to me by Jack earlier, that maybe 50 slides doesn't fit into 15 minutes. So what I'm going to try and do is to highlight some of the major findings so far, and if people would like the PowerPoint with the tables and diagrams, which us demographers have a penchant for using, I'm very happy to provide it to you, since I think that would back up the things that I'm going to say. First of all, I'd ask the question, what are the elements of population dynamics which are important in regional areas? And I'll arrange my remarks around those key issues. The first of these I'm not going to spend much time on, and that is natural increase, the extent to which births outnumber deaths. That's obviously a crucial element in population change, and I'll say something about that. The main focus, though, is on migration. And here I'm going to be looking at both international migration as it affects regional Australia, but particularly we'll focus on the movement within Australia, internal movement. I think it's important in looking at movement to not just look at the net effects of movement. And I think in the past this has tended to be the case, that people have looked at the balance between in and out migration and just focused on it. But one of the early findings of what we're studying would suggest that the composition of the in and the out flows is really quite different. So the overall effects of migration can be much more than is indicated by the difference between in and out migration represented in the net migration net migration figure. I also want to look a bit at temporary migration, because I think that's something that also tends to be missed out because it's not captured in many of the official statistics. And the other thing which I'm going to briefly mention might surprise some people, and it's ageing. Now, ageing doesn't involve people moving from one place to another, but it does result in very significant changes as people move from one stage of the life cycle to another. And I see it as being absolutely crucial in the dynamics of change in non-metropolitan populations. I think it's often overlooked in Australia just how significant numerically the population is outside of our capital cities. More than 1/3 Australians live outside of the capital cities, and yet so much of our national discourse, at least implicitly, is about the 2/3 who live in the capital cities without recognition being given to those who live outside. And I think there's a number of myths about regional populations which I'm trying to dispel in the report. The first is that regional populations are declining. Certainly not the case. Overall, non-metropolitan populations have been increasing over a fairly long period now at about the same rate as the metropolitan population. It varies from year to year, but it certainly is growing. We are dealing with a dynamic growth situation, albeit one in which there's an enormous variety between one place and another. We also sometimes hear that regional populations are much more homogeneous as opposed to the heterogeneity which we get in our capital cities. Again, very wrong. Our regional populations are enormously diverse, and I'll say something about that in a moment. We're told that immigrants don't settle in regional areas. Again, real evidence that this pattern of migrants settling outside of the capital cities is increasing. We're told too that policy doesn't influence where people settle. Again, I think that is very much something which can be disproved. And the final myth suggests that everybody is moving to Sydney. In fact, there is only one group of Australians who are moving to Sydney more than they are moving out of Sydney, and that is young people aged 15 to 24. In every other age group, there are more people moving out of Sydney than moving into Sydney once you discount international migrants. International migration is the engine of development of Sydney, not internal migration. So already in Australia we're seeing quite significant movement from metropolitan areas to the regions. Okay, well I want now to move on to look at the various processes which I mentioned. I think it's interesting, just in looking at some of the most recent results from the census, I picked out the 10 fastest growing areas in Australia, local government areas. 9 of them are non-metropolitan. Only 1 is metropolitan. Unfortunately, when I looked at the 10 most declining areas, they also were all regional areas. So we're dealing with quite a diversity in which there is some quite significant differences, particularly the coastal inland contrast is one which is growing more significant all the time. Just briefly on natural increase. Fertility is higher in non-metropolitan Australia than it is in the capital cities. Women have more children on average, and as a result, our non-metropolitan populations are younger. We have a bigger concentration of the age structures in the under 15 age group, and that showed up quite significantly in the last census. On the other hand, mortality levels are also higher, and this is pretty much a function, I think, of the differential provision of services between metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas. But natural increase generally is slightly higher in regional areas than it is in cities. What about international migration? We're a country of migrants. In Australia at the moment, half of us are either a migrant or the child of a migrant. Now that is an incredible figure by international standards. People think that America is a nation of migrants. They have 18% of their population who is a first or a second generation migrant. We've got 50%. So it is very much a country close to its migrant origins. On the other hand, since World War II, we've seen an increasing tendency for migrants when they come to Australia to settle in capital cities. Where they have settled outside of the capitals, they've been in a very narrow range of types of areas. They've been irrigation areas, market gardening, some of the big regional centres where there is manufacturing. And of course, with the Riverina, we've seen the significant growth in places like Leeton and Griffith. However, things have changed since 2001. And this is I think one of the most exciting developments that we've found so far is that there has been a pattern of increased settlement outside of capital cities with migrants. Still, most of our migrants settle in the capital cities, but for the first time we've seen an increase in the percentage who are settling outside of the capitals. And that's interesting because exactly the same thing has happened in North America. Exactly the same thing is happening in Europe. So there's some process which is operating which wasn't there before, and I think it is important to try and understand it. The other thing which is interesting about it is that they aren't all being found in those particular niches that earlier generations of migrants settled in. They're much more distributed. They're much more found across the dry farming parts of regional areas. The causes of it are really quite interesting. Clearly, one of the factors has been government policy. We've seen the introduction of the regional and state migration system by the Department of Immigration. The Department of Immigration has a special refugee settlement program which affects regional areas and so on. But it's more than that. I think it's very much a pattern of the availability of jobs, and in fact the shortage of jobs in some areas, particularly in some low-skilled areas. And it really has been interesting in studying this, the degree to which there has been successful adjustment and settlement of these migrant groups in communities where I think in the past people would have anticipated that there would have been difficulties because of the homogeneity of the communities that they've gone to. But there are many case studies now where there has been excellent results of people, particularly some of the African refugee groups, settling in dry farming communities. There's a lot of potential for the future here. Firstly, these migrants generally come as families, and families make a difference when they move into regional communities in terms of demand for service and so on. But I think it's also got a bit of a message when we come to look at innovation and developing entrepreneurial capacity in our communities, because a lot of these people are people with get up and go, a lot of people who are risk takers, and I think in the future we're going to see them as potential leaders in our regional communities. Just moving on to internal migration, which is the thing we're mostly studying. It certainly is the main focus, and part of that focus is that we're not just dealing with numbers. I think it's really important to say who's moving. What are the characteristics of those people that are moving and in both into and out of the communities? And that's really what we're spending quite a bit of our time looking at. Thus far, we haven't, as I said before, had the census data on migration, but I've done some indirect estimation, and there are some very clear patterns with coastal in-migration and inland out-migration. There are really stark differences between the coastal and the inland areas, with the exceptions of some of the regional centres and some of the mining communities as well. As I mentioned, net migration losses from capital cities, particularly of young adults, young families, but also young retirement age groups, baby boomer age communities as well. The age patterns, I think, are significant. The gender patterns are interesting. The rate of female migration out of rural areas is higher than it is for males and does represent particular challenges. Education is an issue because it is educationally selective. The level of education of those who leave is greater than those who stay behind. And I think there's a real message about the significance and importance of regional universities like this to provide those opportunities for people in regional areas. Return migration is something which we're looking at, the extent to which people who've left regional communities are prepared to come back. And one of the disturbing findings is that there does appear to be a diminution, a reduction in the extent to which people are returning to some of the dry farming areas. And I think we're seeing that in the number of farm properties where the next generation is not prepared to take over from them. And I think there's some issues there that are policy related which we need to look at. There's a great deal of interregional migration. We tend to think of it all as being from country to city, but regional movement within states particularly is quite important. A separate section of the report is going to be concerned with Indigenous migration. The Indigenous population is a very mobile one, but it has very distinctive patterns, again, with more of the mobility being interregional rather than being with capital cities. I should have said at the beginning that Australians move house more than any other group. Every year, 18% of Australians move house. Now that is a much higher level than any other country in the world. However, most of that mobility does tend to be relatively short distance and is associated with housing market adjustments and so on. But nevertheless, it is a very, very high level of mobility. I was going to say something about temporary migration because I think this is starting to influence regional areas through the fly-in, fly-out, drive-in, drive-out systems, but also increasingly with baby boomers establishing second homes in regional areas, that movement's becoming significant as well. Much more difficult to study with the sources of data available, but we're trying a few experimental things in that area. Just briefly, before I say something about policy and conclude, I would like to say something about ageing. Ageing is the number one demographic factor facing Australia in the next couple of decades. We have all these incredible debates about how many Australians. The real issue which is facing us over the next couple of decades, like other OECD countries, is ageing. And ageing is seen as being something apocalyptic. However, it is an enormous opportunity for Australia, and I think an opportunity for regional areas, because I think it does offer many chances for facilitating development rather than creating extra costs. Baby boomers are the key here. The baby boomer population in Australia represent a quarter of the Australian population. They are 42% of the workforce. They are huge in terms of demographic and economic impacts. They're overrepresented in regional Australia. There's a higher proportion in regional Australia than there is in the capital cities. They're likely to be more mobile in retirement. And just as an example, where we've been doing studies in some coastal communities in New South Wales and Queensland, where up to half of the population of the housing stock is made up of holiday homes. 2/3 of the owners of those holiday homes are baby boomers, and 1/3 of them have absolute intentions of settling permanently in them. That represents a very significant redistribution of population over the next decade or so. And the whole issue of how this can be mobilised and used for regional development, I think, is something which does need to be considered. Just in terms of policy, and we're really at our early stages here, but I think it would be wrong to suggest that this is simply something which should be left to the interplay of economic forces. Economic forces are significant in shaping migration, but we've done a lot of interviewing of people who've moved in and out of regional areas over recent times. And jobs are important. Jobs are necessary, but they're not sufficient. If you think that just creating jobs will bring people to regional areas, that's not going to happen. It is crucial that education services, health services and so on are at a standard where people are satisfied that the sort of schools and health services that their kids will get is similar to what they would get in city areas. Lifestyle is crucial. It is very important, and that is something which regional areas have to sell. And more of the work that we do, we realise that we're dealing with very segmented markets these days in terms of what people want in terms of lifestyle. And I think there is definitely a potential for particularly attracting people with skills, needed skills, into regional areas. The youth out-migration issue, it is one of the real consistencies of the data that in every regional area there is a net loss of young people, people in their late teens and early 20s. Even in sort of Gold Coast, along the north coast of New South Wales, there are a lot more young people who move out than move in. So even in the areas that are growing very rapidly, we're losing those groups. And to some extent, I don't see that as being a problem. I really don't. I think that if our regional communities' education systems are producing young people who can go out and compete in international and national labour markets, that's a good thing. The crucial thing is getting enough of them back and enough of other people back into the community to fill those skill and labour needs. And looking at ways in which this can be achieved is something which will be, I think, quite a challenge. In the international migration area, I see international migration being much more significant in regional Australia in the next 20 years than it has been in the last 20 years. It is a real chance to attract people with the skills, with the entrepreneurial ability to make those significant contributions to the human capital of regional communities, which is so significant. One of the themes too, I think we need to look at is retention. What are the things about communities which keep people? It's one thing to attract international migrants, attract other groups into those communities, but what are the things which actually keep them there? And I think while the economy and jobs are really central, we really do also have to look at the service provision side of things and the lifestyle side of things as well, as part of the total package if we're looking at overall development of those communities. So just in conclusion, I see migration and ageing not so much as problems. There's certainly challenges associated with them, but to me there's also an enormous amount of potential to really be an additional element as we strive to increase the human capital in regional areas. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Graeme said he's got about 5 minutes for any questions, so if you've got any you'd like to put your hand up, and while people are thinking, I might just make a couple of comments, Graeme. I mean, you had a lot of interesting insights there. Probably one of the things that I've noticed, I mean, I grew up in Wagga and now it's quite multicultural. I mean, it was very homogeneous when I grew up, but Wagga is a designated refugee relocation site, so that's certainly changing our demographics considerably. Yeah.
I think and Wagga's not unusual with that, and since I think 2007 the Department of Immigration has designated a number of rural communities for settling refugees. And it copped a lot of criticism at the time because it was saying, right, you're really settling these people away from all of the support services that are available in the big communities, all of the family support systems and so on. But I think the reality's been that it's been really quite successful generally. There have been some bad incidents in some country towns, but generally what's worked is the enormous social capital in regional communities which has absorbed families, and schools have been absolutely crucial in that whole process. I think a lot of it's regional stereotypes that people in the cities are much more liberal, much more accepting, all of those sorts of things, whereas country people aren't. It's just not true. And I think it's really surprised, apart from everyone else, it's surprised the Department of Immigration, I think. But we've done a lot of work on refugees, and one of the things which that shows is that after about 5 to 10 years, refugees are definitely net positive contributors to the economy of Australia. In the first couple of years, there are issues in terms of adjustment and so on, but certainly by the time you get 5, 10 years, they converge towards the Australian system level of employment and participation. By the time you get to the second generation, their kids outperform Australian-born origin kids. It's wrong to say that this is a cost, an economic cost on the community. It's definitely an advantage. The other thing which we found was that people of refugee origin tend to form their own businesses much more than other groups. We looked at the 10 richest Australians, 10 richest people on the BRW rich list. 3 out of 10 came to Australia with nothing as refugees. So, you know, there may well be something to the fact that refugees are the risk takers, are the people who've got that entrepreneurialism and so on. So they may be adding something to the community as well. So, you know, I think there's some myths out there about refugees which tend to, once you look at the data and take a longer term view, are really shot down in terms of their economic contribution.
In the front.
I was interested in your observation that people in the past who had arrived in Australia as migrants had particularly gone to cities and had gone only to those parts of country Australia where there might have been a strong manufacturing base or indeed a big construction project or what have you. And you were pointing to some trends which seem to be happening in Australia and also other OECD countries where that seems to be changing. I'm wondering whether or not an idea or a possible explanation that you might have considered for why that might be happening is the far greater access to information that people have today versus, say, the migrants of the 1950s and 60s who would have arrived in Australia without anywhere near the level of information about country districts and the type of lifestyle or jobs or opportunities in those areas, whereas one can get on the internet nowadays and get a great deal more information and be better informed in making those decisions.
Could well be, because I think one of the strongest finding in migration, you know, I've been looking at migration all over the world for 40 years, and one of the things which you learn is that most migrants don't go somewhere where they don't know anybody or where they don't know anything about that area, and that networks, social networks, are really the most crucial factor in channeling migration. And to the extent to which people are able to get richer and more detailed information beyond those networks which they have, I think, you know, that's a reasonable hypothesis and certainly something that we need to, you know, we could look at. But I think one of the messages is the crucial importance of networks. Is once you get, and this applies very much to Australian migrants too, is that the information that's spread by word of mouth from people who move into an area to colleagues and friends in other areas can often be the really absolutely crucial piece of information which leads them to move because it's trusted.
Any other comments, questions? Yep, across there.
You said something that we need to keep the migrants in the regional areas. In the morning also I asked the same question, that what are the factors we need to keep into consideration. And when I was just traveling, one thing just struck me, like the people usually, the people just flock to the regional areas. So in Wagga we have one what's a welcome to Wagga function. So maybe the councillors and the people here, and this goes to all the regional places, we can just ask the people who are there that what factors brought them to a regional place like Wagga. So in that case, we just know their expectation, and then we can just ask one more question from them, that what are their expectations in the next 2 years. So in this way, we can just work on our assets, and we can also, work on our challenges too, that what are their expectations, so that they'll stay in the regional place like Wagga.
I think when you asked the question this morning, my ears pricked up, I must say. I totally agree that if you look at the efforts which have been made by states like my own state in South Australia to use the state-specific and regional migration part of the migration program in order to attract migrants to us as a peripheral state, I've been critical of the government's efforts because they see it purely in terms of attraction, bringing people in. The people are mandated to stay for 2 years, but the whole effort is getting them into South Australia. But in terms of retention, there's virtually nothing in the program at all. Retention is absolutely crucial, but it's also crucial for Australians to move into these communities, and having mechanisms which assist the whole adjustment process is absolutely fundamental. And our work with refugees, we've found schools are really just the key part of the community, because most people are coming in as families, their kids go to schools, and some of the principals have been quite marvellous in terms of bringing the parents into socially active things as well. So, but local government's got a role, but also other community organisations as well. And I think in general, in the studies that we've done anyway, the communities have been pretty good at this, because it's been done not so much mandated or structured by government, but actually happening organically within the community, where you've got this enormous social capital which is kicked in, which is famous for in many areas. But rural and regional communities differ enormously in their ability to be welcoming to outsiders, and I think understanding those dimensions, I think, is fairly important.
Any quick questions? One last one up the back there.
Thank you. Is that on? Yep. Thank you for your presentation, Graeme. Very interesting. A couple of times you mentioned the differences between coastal and inland communities, and I wondered if you could just illuminate that a little bit around some of the key differences you're seeing.
Yeah, well, certainly from a demographic perspective, the differences are enormous. In terms of population growth, in terms of age composition, with greater numbers of young working age people in their 30s and 40s, that seems to be the most significant group moving into these areas, the young family demographic. Retirees are significant as well, but that young family group is the most important. But certainly in many of our dryland farming areas, I think we really face a real crisis in terms of availability of workforce into the future. The elderly nature of many of the primary producers now, and the fact that many of them don't have sons and daughters who are necessarily going to be taking it on. I think there is some very significant issues in regional Australia about the replacement of that next generation of workers in primary industry, especially when I think most of us would recognise that primary industry, agriculture and so on is going to become more important in the future than it is at the moment, and the workforce that's going to be needed in that area is quite significant, and I think that is a real challenge. I think one of the issues which I didn't mention, which we wanted to look at, is ageing, not just in relation to the total population, but as it affects particular parts of the labour market. There are certain sectors in the labour market which are older than others, bigger concentrations in the older age groups. And the medical workforce in regional Australia is older than the medical workforce in capital city Australia, despite the young overseas doctors that are being employed. So, there are many challenges there too, I think, and it'd be, I think one of the problems in the analysis of regional Australia is that if you put it all together demographically, you have the coastal areas with one set of trends and the inland areas with another set of trends, and they're all mashed together. And the detail of it actually tends to get lost. But I think there are many challenges which we face in inland Australia, which I think do need to be engaged.
Thank you, Graeme. Graeme will be joining us later on the panel, so if you've got any additional questions or want to follow up any of those topics, that'll be opportunity. Okay, we better move along. We're cutting our time now, so I'd like to now welcome Jack Asher, General Manager of Research and Policy from RAI, to give us a bit of some findings on the stocktake of regional research. Thanks, Jack.
A good metaphor or perhaps indication of what we're dealing with when we think about regional research change and development. We've had Graeme talk about some of the work we've got going, looking at broad trends, changes and things that are happening throughout our regions. And then we've had a look at a very practical innovation, which is also an example of local entrepreneurship, which leads directly to regional development, as well as something that can impact heavily on services, which we also know from Graeme's work is very important for attracting and keeping people in regions. So it all ties together, I think, in an interesting way. And at RAI, we've been grappling with how we knit that together at a national level, what we already know about regions and how they're changing, and what we can do to make things better in the future. The particular challenge, I think, for us is to give governments and regions the confidence to understand the complexity of the things that they're faced with, and to act to try and make things better, despite the fact that regions are dynamic places, that they're changing very fast, and that we can't control everything that happens in the future. But I want to talk to you today about our stocktake of research. It's our first large initiative, and we've heard a little bit about it already today. But I think there's some findings from the process which are really important for people to understand. People are interested in regional research, people are interested in how we engage in some of these issues and achieve change. The purpose of the project was to get a better understanding of what we already know, and I think that's been mentioned a couple of times today. At this point, I probably should acknowledge the team from Marsden Jacobs, who were kind enough to help us with the project and did a lot of hard work. We've been through tens of thousands of pieces of research. We've identified hundreds of data sets, all of which are trying to contribute something to regional debate and discussion. We've made them more available to people in universities like Charles Sturt, in regions like the Riverina, in policy positions throughout federal government. They're now available they were available before, but they're now much easier to connect with through the site that we've got together for RAI. But we've also thought a little bit about what the whole stock of research tells us. The diversity of information, the diversity of activity that's taking place throughout regional Australia at regional universities like Charles Sturt here, and in practical places like we've just seen with the demonstration. Because I think we need to understand, while diversity is great, where are we going? What are we doing, and are we building over time the fundamental information, knowledge and energy that we need to actually kind of achieve the change that we want for the future? So let me just take you through a couple of high-level findings from the work, and I really wanted to set up a discussion. We've got some very knowledgeable people from locally and from our RAI network to come and give their views on how they think we resolve these problems. But I just wanted to share a few of the insights we've got from the process. And I should say that the more detailed work's available on our website, and it's well worth a read. There's some quite detailed reports looking at quite specific opportunities and things that RAI is going to be looking at, and things that organisations like CSU I think will be interested in. But this slide shows the top 15 topics of regional research in the last decade. Out of the 1,500 pieces of research we've identified as really being closely related to regional development, these are the top 15 areas. Interestingly, you can see that health's very important. You can see that Indigenous issues have had a lot of effort. 15% of the research we identified has been related to that topic. You can see the economy, you can see population, you can see all the topics you'd expect. And so we're doing a lot of work. We knew that. The question is, how are we knitting this together? How are we translating all the diversity of this work into information that people can use practically? And you know, we went through a process in the stocktake of talking to people in policy roles, talking to researchers, and despite of all of this great research that's going on, there's a real challenge in connecting it together, building an agenda out of it, and making sure that the knowledge that's being developed over time in our institutions is available and being used by policymakers. One of the things we're grappling with at RAI is when you look at the diversity of issues and you try and knit this together, and I know that Lani and people who work at the regional level have the same issue. You know, how do you knit the great mass of information on issues together into something coherent that can energise people and can actually lead to change? And so that's a real challenge, and I think something we need to think about, as well as doing more research on issues. think the other major finding, which is worth thinking about, is the way we're orientating our work. And Adrian mentioned at the start some of the traditional long-standing challenges we've had in regional Australia, and we do work on these, and we make progress, and we overcome them, and they come back. But what the research has shown is that, and Mal mentioned this earlier, is that we're not doing enough work on opportunities. We're not doing enough work on potential. We're not doing enough work on how regions can change and grow. We're at times getting stuck in the problems that we face, and I think we really need to think about whether that's a good thing for the future, or whether it doesn't create an unnecessary image that regions struggle more than they do. I think this is also an opportunity in itself, because people involved in regional issues know that there's amazing opportunities, there's amazing things happening in regional Australia, but are we capturing this and are we presenting it to government so that they understand that there's growth, they understand that international people are coming and making their lives in regional Australia? I don't think that our research is doing enough of that kind of work, and so we get back not as much as we should from people who are trying to make decisions on behalf of regions. And the other thing that this graph shows is that the policymakers are interested. We often talk about government being against us or just not particularly focused on regions, but the people we spoke to frustrated or just looking for more of those positive stories and grounding that in really good research and information that gives it some substance and enables you to make decisions. And so people involved in research at Sturt University, a whole diversity of the topics, it's worth thinking about how we connect with organisations like RDAs, how we connect with organisations like us at RAI, and bring those pieces of work together into a bigger picture so we can get some change. So what do you do with all that? We're thinking hard. We've been having robust debate amongst the group during this week about how we can make a contribution. So I said earlier we're trying to knit things together and present them more coherently at a national level, not overriding the diversity of things that's happening in the region, but trying to make sense out of that so that people in policy positions have the confidence to make good decisions. The thing that struck me out of the stock take is I don't think we've got the fundamentals right, and Andrew Beer mentioned offhand this morning that some of our basic information on regions is quite poor, and so even though there's a lot of data and there's a lot of information, we're not able to use that, we're not able to access it, and so we have to think hard about whether those fundamental things that you need for a policy area to work well, for people to understand what's happening, are really in place. We're thinking hard about that through our competitiveness index, which Sandra mentioned, and how we can bring things together. I think the biggest contribution that RAI can make is to knit things together. We'll come up with a few of our own good ideas, I hope, but if we can synthesise and knit things together, I think we can make a real contribution. But I'd encourage people to think about whether the research they're doing at Sturt and other places, how that impacts on the fundamentals for regions and how that might show the way towards a better basic understanding of what's happening in regions and how that can be understood at a wider level. The other consequence of this is that John Tomaney spoke at our early forum about the great work that's being done in OECD and overseas, which has really changed and challenged some of those assumptions you have about growth and change in regions and what's happening. But because we're missing those fundamentals, the OECD work stops at the state level in Australia, and so it doesn't. Haven't yet had the opportunity to test how much those international findings, which are part of the developed world, really apply and where they apply and what the Australian story of that is. And there's some real opportunities, I think, in taking that work and translating it for the Australian context, because that kind of work is changing the debate overseas and can help us change the debate here as well. I think the other area to think about is the one I've mentioned before, which is about that focus on opportunities. So I've spoken a little bit about that. we're thinking about processes. How do things change? And I think people in the room probably know more about that than I do from where you've been and where you're working on. So how do we bring the case studies and things that you already know about together with RAI? Sandra mentioned pitch an idea. Tell us about what you think could work in this context, and we'd appreciate hearing about that.